In this and the preceding part, we are also fulfilling an old request, as you have asked us many times to deal with fighting dogs, to talk about their formation, character, history, and also why they have evolved throughout history. You can watch the first part by clicking on the card in the upper right corner now. In the second part in this series, we will deal with the Japanese fighting dogs and the dog fights of the Eurasian steppes, where the ancestors of the large-bodied shepherd dogs known today have evolved into past. 1. Fighting dogs and dog fights in Japan. In the previous part, we mentioned the name of Chasakabe Motochika and also why he started embracing the fighting of dogs on the island of Shikoku, then with ancient Japanese dog breeds, like Akitas. If we can believe the Japanese chronicles, an event happened in the 17th century that brought significant changes. An English frigate was wrecked in a bay called Tosa on Shikoku Island. Because at that time, Japanese samurai were not too friendly with strangers and human life did not cost too much, no news remained about the fate of the crew and the captain. In contrast to them, however, the large-bodied, brown-colored dog found among the shipwrecks, reminiscent of early mastiffs, survived and ran a formidable career at that age. Once there, the Japanese began to use him in dog fights, and this dog, with his awesome fighting abilities, regularly won over the former local stars of the dog arenas. Because of this, after a while, the Japanese increasingly began to use him as a breeding male, whose bloodline has been documented and has survived to this day. Descendants of this dog, whose name we do not know, were crossed with the most successful Akitas, and then with English bulldogs and pointer-type dogs that later arrived in Japan. This is how the Japanese fighting dog, the Tosa Inu, is said to be evolved over the centuries and even got its name from Tosa Bay, as Inu means dog in Japanese. Today, there are about 25,000 officially registered fighting dogs in Japan, the vast majority of which are Tosas, and whose fights have been and are based on special traditions and rules. These dogs' fights are organized on wooden-built platforms covered with carpets and canvases, and based on their results, similarly to sumo wrestling, they can achieve 3 ratings: yokozuna, ozeki and sekiwake. It is forbidden to make a sound during the fights. These dogs are trained to be silent during the training. The length of the fight is maximized in 30 minutes. If it gets very hard, it is stopped several times and the dogs are subject to a medical examination. An important note is that in these struggles, in contrast to previous Western practice, all forms of betting, gambling, or baitings were forbidden. These struggles were considered by the Japanese as sports events, which of course did not make them unacceptable to us. However, times are changing and today the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, has more and more influence on these dog fights, which is why these ancient traditions are also becoming more and more commercialized and businesslike. 2. Fighting dogs of the Eurasian steppes. On the vast steppe from the western fringe of Asia to the eastern parts of Europe, where for thousands of years, the majority of the ancestors of the main shepherd dog breeds known today have lived and formulated, mostly nomadic people lived, grazed their animals and traded with them. In these vast lands, the shepherd families and their animals lived partially separated from each other's, and contact between them was very rare. Farm animals were protected by shepherd dogs from large predators, but also against human intruders and robbers. It is worth considering, or to think it through, that in a time when the livelihoods of a nation, clan, or family depended on their animals, how tremendous was the role and the value of a well-working shepherd dog, who protected livestock from almost all types of dangers of that time. Let's think it through, how important it was for an average shepherd to refresh his dog's bloodlines with the most effective dogs of the region who had the best abilities to fight and defend their livestock. These shepherd families met in a year once or twice when big markets and celebrations were held. During these events, they met other people from other regions, who brought their dogs with them where and when, according to sources, the most successful alpha dog males were often competed in fighting with each others. In the majority of cases, because of completely different reasons and intentions than in Western countries or even in Japan. At these events, decisions about breeding, bloodlines and future were made on the basis of these fights. The winner of a dog fight weighed and valued gold. Everyone wanted to have their bitch dogs mate with them, so that efficiency and fighting spirit would be passed on the next generations of their dogs. These events, in this sense, were the ancient, rather bloody and violent predecessors of today's dog shows in those times. Each of these shepherd dogs competed with each other were of great value to the shepherd families, so these competitions were not usually held for baiting, as in the Western world, or for sporting purposes, as in Japan, and usually did not have fatal consequences. These dogs were too valuable for the pastoral families to do that. This struggling past and selection is quite much present and known in many livestock guardian and large-bodied shepherd breeds. Let's simply we think of Kangals or Central Asian shepherds. Finally, we would like to emphasize once again that this short historical summary does not reflect the views of DogCastTV staff, as we, in our own age, reject all forms of dog fightings. If you haven't seen it and are curious about the first part of this video, you can watch it here. Thank you very much for your attention.